Welcome to the Hindu Daily. Okay, so today we've got quite a mix. Sources covering everything from century of civil service in India to looking at these really ambitious, maybe even risky climate ideas.
Yeah, it's a fascinating spread. We're going to dig into these, looking at them section by section from the paper. Editorial first, then opinion, science, and text and context.
Sounds good.
Yeah,
It seems like there's a thread running through some of these about, central control versus local action and how things actually work on the ground.
definitely. And we kick off with a big one on that central theme. The UPSC, the Union Public Service Commission, it's hitting its centenary, 100 years, on October 1st.
A whole century.
Yeah.
But the article points out its roots, the idea of integrity, that actually goes back a bit further, doesn't it?
That's right. The need was sort of flagged in the Government of India Act, 1919, but it really got structured after the Lee Commission in 1924.
The Lee Commission, right?
Yeah, and the key takeaway from them, which the source really hammers home, was this need to shield the civil service from political or personal influences. That's like its core principle.
And considering India's diversity, its inequalities, that focus on fairness is probably why it's still seen as this level playing field. It embodies that Indian dream idea, drawing people from everywhere.
From almost every district, yeah. Which, when you think about it, creates this massive logistical puzzle every single year.
Unbelievable scale. What are the numbers like?
We're talking 10 lakh to 12 lakh applicants just for the preliminary stage. That's 1 million to 1.2 million people.
Wow.
And then for the mains, they choose from 48 optional subjects, and they can write in English or, any of the 22 constitutional languages.
That's just mind-boggling. 10 to 12 lakh people. And the exams themselves, where do they happen?
The prelims alone are held across more than 2,500 venues nationwide. So managing that, keeping it secure, confidential, and then getting to a single merit-based list.
Well, that's why it has such trust. It really underpins its reputation. And they're modernizing too, aren't they? Without losing that core integrity.
Exactly. The source mentions things like a new online application portal, which makes sense, and using face recognition technology.
To prevent impersonation at those thousands of centers.
Precisely. And then there's this interesting initiative called Pratibha Setu.
Pratibha Setu, Professional Resource and Talent Integration Bridge for hiring aspirants.
Yeah.
That sounds different. What does it do?
It's quite clever, actually. It takes candidates who got all the way to the interview stage, so they're clearly very capable, but just missed out on the final lost for the civil services.
Okay.
And it helps connect them with other employment opportunities, often in the private sector. So it leverages the UPSC's intense vetting process to build a talent pool for the wider economy. It's about making sure that talent isn't lost.
That's a really smart way to use that massive filtering process. And they're looking at AI and digital tech for the future, too.
Yeah, the article suggests they're exploring ways to use those tools to make the whole process even more efficient while obviously maintaining that fairness.
Okay, so from this pillar of centralized meritocracy, the next editorial shifts gears quite dramatically. It's a critique of centralization, focusing on India's youth and this idea of a district-first democracy.
Yes, and it starts with a really stark imbalance. You've got 65% of the population under 35, huge youth bulge, but 85% of Indians actually stay in the district where they were born.
85%. That's high.
It is. And contrast that with cities. They take up only about 3% of India's land, but generate over 60% of the GDP.
So massive economic activity packed into small urban areas, while most people, especially young people, are dispersed elsewhere.
Exactly. And the argument is that this concentration kind of stifles domestic consumption and leaves a lot of talent untapped out in the districts.
And the article links this to the way governance works, to top-down.
Pretty much. It argues that these top-down, often technocratic schemes, while they might look efficient on paper, they end up narrowing the space for actual local political involvement.
How so?
Well, it suggests elected representatives at the local level get reduced to just being sort of intermediaries for handing out benefits from central schemes, like managing entitlements rather than actually shaping the development path for their own area.
Right, so they're administrators, not really leaders, setting local priorities.
And this, the source claims, leads to a growing sense of political fatigue, particularly among young people who don't see real agency or opportunity developing in their home districts.
Okay, so what's the proposed fix? Not getting rid of the district administration, I assume.
No, not at all. The idea is to complement the existing district-first bureaucracy with a district-first democracy. It's about reframing the district as more than just an administrative box. It should be a democratic commons.
A democratic commons. What would that look like in practice?
Well, it would make accountability much more direct, more tangible. You could break down national schemes district by district to see where investment is actually going or not going. It pushes decision-making closer to the people affected.
Makes sense. But the article also says this needs buy-in from the top 10%.
Yeah, it makes a point that for this to work, it needs visible participation from India's elites, corporate leaders, intellectuals, influential people. They need to help translate good intentions into concrete local action.
So moving beyond just policy talk into actual local collaboration and doing it in a way that unites, not divides.
Exactly. Rooted in a sort of shared national purpose, but played out locally, district by district,
Yep.
avoiding the usual partisan gridlock.
Interesting. It's a call for decentralizing power to match where people actually live.
Yeah, bridging that gap between national policy and local reality.
Okay, let's shift to the opinion section now. We're looking at another angle on empowerment, this time focused on girls' education through the Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao campaign.
Right, and this piece starts with a great historical example from Gujarat. The Gaikwad dynasty apparently used to penalize fathers if they didn't educate their daughters.
Huh. Real consequences.
Exactly. It highlights that you need accountability, not just good intentions, for policies to bite.
And this connects to the more recent Gujarat model, the Kanya Kelavani campaign from 2003.
Yes, that campaign is presented as a good example of tackling practical barriers. One key thing they did was ensure schools had separate toilets for girls. Seems basic, but it was a major reason girls, especially adolescents, were dropping out.
Addressing the real-world obstacles. And did it work?
The results cited are pretty impressive. Female literacy in Gujarat climbed to 70%, which was above the national average then, and dropout rates fell by like 90% in the districts they focused on.
Wow, 90%, that's huge.
Yeah. So that success story was part of the foundation for launching Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, BBP, nationwide in 2015. It needed a coordinated push across different ministries, women and child development, health, education, HRD.
And the national impact. The article mentioned some key metrics.
It does. India's overall sex ratio at birth has improved from 919 girls per 1,000 boys around 2015-16 up to 929 by 2019-21. That's a positive shift.
And fertility rates.
The total fertility rate, or TFR, has dropped to 2.0. That's actually below the replacement level of 2.1. And this is strongly linked to rising female education levels.
That's a fundamental demographic shift.
Absolutely. And there are other positive effects mentioned, like the infant mortality rate for girls dropping significantly, from 49 down to 33 by 2020. It creates this positive cycle. Educated mothers tend to have children who do better in school, have better health.
That multiplier effect is powerful. The article also mentioned awareness levels.
Yeah, it cites a survey in Madhya Pradesh where something like 89.5% of people were aware of BBBP, so the message got out.
But linking back to the previous article, even with these national successes, maybe the benefits aren't felt evenly everywhere, which could explain some of that youth fatigue.
That's a fair point. While the national stats are moving in the right direction, the distribution of those gains and the creation of local opportunities might still be patchy. That's exactly the kind of issue the district-first democracy idea aims to tackle, ensuring national progress translates into widespread local benefit and engagement.
Okay, quite a contrast there.
Yeah.
Let's pivot now to the science section. This is where things get, well, planetary in scale. We're looking at geoengineering, specifically why some big ideas for the poles are apparently failing.
Right, geoengineering. It's always this tricky subject, isn't it? Is it a brilliant fix or just incredibly reckless? This new study, led by Professor Martin Siegert, looked at 5 major concepts for polar regions and basically concluded they don't work well and could even be really harmful.
5 concepts. Let's take the most well-known one first. Stratospheric aerosol injection, SAI. Spraying stuff high up to reflect sunlight. Why doesn't that work at the poles?
Well, it has 2 pretty big flaws there. First, in the polar winter, there's hardly any sunlight to reflect, so it's useless for half the year.
Makes sense.
And second, in the summer, the ice and snow are already highly reflective naturally, so the added benefit of the aerosols is much smaller than it would be elsewhere.
Okay, so less effective. But the article mentions a bigger danger, something called termination shock.
Ah, yes. This is the really scary part. Imagine SAI is like putting a plaster on the climate. It hides the symptom, warming, but doesn't cure the disease, greenhouse gases. Termination shock is what happens if you suddenly rip that plaster off.
So if the SAI project stops for some reason,
Exactly. If it stops abruptly, maybe due to funding cuts, political disagreement, war, whatever the warming that was being masked would suddenly surge back, global temperatures could shoot up incredibly fast, potentially within just 10 to 20 years. Much faster than the warming we're seeing now.
That sounds catastrophic, like falling off a climate cliff.
It's a huge risk. Plus, the cost is immense. The study estimates something like $55 million per year per country if, say, 30 countries were involved. And that's just operating costs, before you even get into the massive legal and governance issues of who controls the planet's thermostat.
Okay, so SAI at the poles looks bad. What's next? Sea curtains, or sea walls. Trying to block warm water getting to the ice sheets.
Yeah, the idea is physically block the warm currents, but the logistics are just mind-bending. You'd need to install these massive structures with heavy foundations on the seabed in places like the Amundsen Sea in Antarctica.
Which is not exactly the easiest place to work.
Notoriously difficult, extremely remote, hostile conditions, only accessible for maybe a few months a year. The study suggests just building the specialized ships needed for this kind of construction could cost $500 million each.
$500 million per ship. And the environmental risks.
Oh, they're huge, too. You risk messing up ocean circulation patterns, potentially globally. The materials themselves could break down and release toxic stuff. And of course, you're putting giant walls in the way of marine life, fish, seals, whales that need to move through those waters to feed. It could devastate local ecosystems.
Right. Then we have what the article calls inefficient ice interventions, like microbeads.
Yes, the idea of spreading tiny reflective beads, like glass microbeads, on sea ice to make it reflect more sunlight. Again, the scale is the killer. You'd need an estimated 360 million tons of these beads every year.
360 million tons. How much is that?
It's roughly the same as the entire world's annual production of plastics. Just think about that volume. Plus, there are worries about toxicity for things like zooplankton at the base of the food web. And some research even suggests they might end up absorbing heat and causing net warming.
So, potentially counterproductive and ecologically risky. What about pumping seawater onto the ice?
This one's about pumping seawater up onto Arctic sea ice in winter so it freezes thicker. Sounds simple, maybe. But the scale again. Estimates suggest you'd need up to 100 million pumps just for the Arctic.
100 million pumps?
Yeah, running constantly. Requiring about 1 million units of electricity annually for a decade. The estimated cost, around $500 billion a year.
$500 billion a year? For maybe marginal gains in ice thickness?
Pretty much. The study concludes it's just completely impractical, economically and energetically.
And the last two briefly, basal water removal and ocean fertilization.
Basal water removal, trying to pump water out from under glaciers, is seen as way too energy-intensive, requiring constant, massive power input. And ocean fertilization, adding iron to stimulate plankton blooms to absorb CO2, is just too risky. You could trigger uncontrolled blooms, mess up food webs, and the scale needed makes it unviable anyway.
So the overall verdict on these polar geoengineering ideas is pretty damning.
Very damning. The study's conclusion is blunt. These are dangerous distractions. The real focus needs to be on decarbonization. Cutting emissions is the only approach that tackles the root cause safely and effectively. They also mention maintaining protected areas, though that has its own issues sometimes. But fundamentally, lowering emissions is the path.
A stark reminder to focus on the source of the problem. Okay, sticking with science but looking outwards now. The next article is about IMAP, the Interstellar Mapping and Acceleration Probe, mapping our solar system's protective bubble.
That's right, the Heliosphere. It's this vast bubble created by the solar wind, the stream of particles flowing out from the sun. This bubble shields us, Earth and the other planets, from a lot of the harsh galactic cosmic rays and interstellar dust coming from outside our solar system.
But we don't fully understand its structure.
No, it's complex and dynamic, and we have relatively few direct measurements, especially of its boundary. So IMAP, which launched in September, its mission is specifically to map that boundary region, track the energetic particles moving through it, and ultimately help us improve space weather forecasts.
And where is IMAP going to do this mapping from?
It's heading out to the Sun-Earth Lagrange Point 1, or L1. That's about 1.6 million kilometers away from Earth in the direction of the sun.
Lagrange point. That's one of those stable gravitational spots, right?
Exactly. It's a place where the gravitational pull of the sun and Earth balance out, allowing the spacecraft to essentially hover there relative to us using very little fuel. This gives it a constant, uninterrupted view of the incoming solar wind.
Clever positioning. And it has instruments to measure these particles.
It has 10 instruments, including specialized detectors for energetic neutral atoms, or ENAs, These are crucial because neutral atoms can travel in straight lines from the heliosphere's boundary without being deflected by magnetic fields, giving us a direct view of what's happening out there.
So what kind of new understanding are we hoping for? What are the big implications?
The hope is to get the most detailed maps ever of the heliopause. That's the specific boundary where the solar wind kind of slams into the interstellar medium, the stuff between the stars. One instrument, IMAP-LOW, is even expected to be able to tell the difference between hydrogen and deuterium atoms coming directly from the interstellar medium versus those created within the heliosphere itself.
That sounds quite technical, but what does it mean for us back on Earth?
Well, understanding our heliosphere better tells us a lot about Earth's habitability. It's our primary shield. On a more practical level, better data on the solar wind means much better space weather forecasting.
Protecting satellites, power grids.
Exactly. Predicting solar flares and particle storms more accurately helps protect all that crucial infrastructure. And looking further ahead, if we're serious about sending humans deeper into space, understanding the radiation environment shaped by the heliosphere is absolutely vital for designing safer missions and spacecraft shielding.
Fascinating stuff. Okay, let's bring it back down to Earth for our final section, text and context. First up, a situation involving Indian broadcasters and unpaid dues from Nepal and Bangladesh. Over 350 crore.
Yeah, it's a significant amount. This story is really about the collision of cultural soft power with hard economic realities and regulations. Indian TV channels, especially Hindi and Bengali ones, are super popular in both Nepal and Bangladesh.
Right.
But for international distribution, the broadcasters have to provide what's called a clean feed, basically, the channel without the Indian advertisements. This costs extra to produce and manage, and crucially, these deals are usually priced in US dollars.
Okay, so popular content, special feed, dollar payments. Why aren't they getting paid? 100 crore from Nepal, the rest from Bangladesh.
It's complicated, but the main bottleneck isn't necessarily that the local cable distributors don't have the money in local currency, like Nepalese rupees or Bangladeshi taka. The core problem is getting approval to convert that local currency into dollars to pay the Indian companies.
Oh, so it's a foreign exchange issue, controlled by the governments.
Precisely. Both governments, through their central banks or relevant ministries, have to sign off on releasing the foreign exchange needed. And they're being very strict about where their limited dollar reserves go.
So they're prioritizing other things.
Seems like it. The article mentions Bangladesh, for instance, is using available funds, including things like World Bank loans for absolute essentials, medicine, electricity generation. Media and entertainment payments are falling down the priority list.
And in Nepal, there were regulatory changes too.
Yeah, Nepal apparently brought in some sudden new rules about how channels had to be bundled or offered a la carte in 2023, which threw things into chaos for the foreign broadcasters trying to adapt their business models and pricing.
So why don't the Indian broadcasters just pull the plug? Cut off the clean feed until they get paid? Seems like standard practice.
That's the tricky part. They feel they lack the leverage. Unlike, say, an energy company providing essential power or a telecom company providing vital internet connectivity like Airtel does for landlocked Nepal entertainment, is seen as non-essential.
So cutting it off might not force the government's hands on the Forex issue.
Right, and worse, they're really worried about piracy. Their fear is that if they cut the official clean feed, the distributors will just find ways to pirate the regular Indian satellite feed, strip out the Indian ads illegally, maybe slap their own logo on it.
Which has happened before.
The article says cable operators in Nepal have done similar things in the past, and the broadcasters don't seem to have much faith in being able to enforce contracts or arbitration clauses effectively within the local legal systems there, so they're kind of caught.
The difficult situation. Okay, our final article brings us back to public health, looking at wastewater surveillance, using sewage to track diseases.
Yeah, this is a really powerful and expanding public health tool. The basic idea is that people shed pathogens, viruses, bacteria in their stool and urine. By sampling wastewater from treatment plants, maybe specific locations like hospitals, airports, even airplanes.
You can get a picture of what's circulating in the community.
Exactly. They use strict protocols to measure the amount of a pathogen's genetic material in the sample. And importantly, they can often do whole genome sequencing on those samples.
Which tells you not just if a virus is present, but which specific variant.
Precisely.
Right.
Like with COVID-19, they could track the rise and fall of Delta, then Omicron, etc., just by testing the sewage.
And the big advantage here is early warning, right?
That's the critical part. Wastewater surveillance can often detect an increase in a pathogen more than a week before you see a rise in people actually going to the doctor and getting diagnosed.
Why is that?
Because it captures everything. It includes people who are asymptomatic, people with mild illness who don't bother getting tested, people who can't access testing easily. Clinical case counts miss all those people. Wastewater sees the whole picture earlier.
Giving public health officials a crucial head start.
A huge head start to prepare hospitals, ramp up testing, issue warnings, whatever is needed.
And India has history with this.
Oh, yes. The article notes it's been used for tracking polio in Mumbai since way back in 2001, and it was adopted pretty quickly for COVID-19 surveillance in 5 major cities, and that's still ongoing.
And now it's being expanded significantly.
That's the news here. The Indian Council of Medical Research, ICMR, is planning to roll out surveillance for 10 different viruses across 50 cities. This moves it from being just a specific project, like for polio or COVID, towards a more routine, programmatic national system for tracking a wider range of community health threats.
That sounds like a major step up towards a national surveillance system.
Definitely. The article stresses the need for standard protocols, data sharing, and moving beyond just pilot projects. It even mentions some really cutting-edge ideas being explored,
Like what?
like using machine learning to analyze audio samples of people coughing in public spaces, maybe train stations or clinics, to try and monitor respiratory disease trends non-invasively.
Wow. Listening to the environment for health signals.
Kind of, yeah. It shows how these environmental surveillance methods are evolving.
Looking back across all these articles today, from the UPSC striving for national integrity, the push for district-level democracy, the geoengineering debates, the broadcaster payment issues stuck in central bank bureaucracy, and now this decentralized wastewater data. There's real tension, isn't there?
There absolutely is. It's that constant balancing act. You have institutions like the UPSC designed for centralized strength and fairness reaching across all districts. But then you see how effective democracy, or even just international business, can get bogged down by centralized bottlenecks, whether it's policy that doesn't empower locally, or control over foreign currency, or even relying on big centralized science missions like IMAP to understand risks to decentralized systems like power grids.
So the final thought for you listening might be this. Considering all these examples, where does future progress lie most effectively? Is it in further strengthening those central institutions that guarantee a certain standard across the board, like the UPSC? Or is it more about successfully devolving real power and enabling genuine engagement at the local district level, as that second editorial argued for?
That friction, that push and pull between the center and the localities, seems like it's going to be a defining challenge for India's governance, its economy, maybe even its public health in the years ahead. How do you get the balance right?
Thank you for listening. If you want to provide suggestions, please contact on the Twitter handle given in the episode description. As always, we are eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day